There are scandals that embarrass a family. There are scandals that damage a reputation. And then there are scandals that fundamentally and permanently alter the course of a royal institution. What happened to Prince Andrew belongs in that third category. Because this is not a story about a bad interview or an awkward moment or a photograph that needed explaining. This is a story about a prince, a convicted sex trafficker, a list of names that powerful people spent years trying to keep sealed, and an institution that eventually had no choice but to cut one of its own members loose in order to survive. Welcome to Royal Report Daily. Today we are telling the complete documented story of Prince Andrew, Jeffrey Epstein, and the slow-motion collapse of a royal reputation that took decades to build and approximately 11 minutes of television to destroy. This is the full story, and it starts long before most people were paying attention. Who Andrew was. To understand how far Andrew fell, you first need to understand where he started. Prince Andrew Albert Christian Edward was born on February 19, 1960, the second son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, the first child born to a reigning British monarch in over a century. He was, by most accounts, his mother's favorite. Elizabeth was visibly warmer with Andrew than with her other children. More demonstrative, more openly affectionate. Those who watched the family closely over the decades noted that Andrew occupied a specific place in Elizabeth's emotional world that none of her other children quite matched. He served in the Royal Navy. He flew helicopters in the Falklands War in 1982. He was genuinely brave. He flew missions under fire. He returned a war hero. The public liked him. The press liked him. He was young, handsome, and appeared to have substance behind the title. He married Sarah Ferguson in 1986. The wedding was watched by approximately 500 million people. Fergie, as she became known, was warm and unpretentious and immediately popular. The couple seemed genuinely happy. Then things began to unravel. The marriage deteriorated publicly and messily through the early 1990s. The separation in 1992 was followed by photographs of Fergie having her toes kissed by a financial advisor in the south of France. The divorce was finalized in 1996. Andrew's reputation survived it, but his image had taken its first real hits. He became the UK's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment, a role he held from 2001 to 2011. It was during this period, in this capacity, that Andrew's social world began expanding into the kinds of circles that would eventually destroy him. Jeffrey Epstein was born in Brooklyn in 1953. He dropped out of college. He worked briefly as a math teacher. Then, through a series of connections and apparently extraordinary financial acumen, he became extraordinarily wealthy. By the late 1980s and through the 1990s, he was managing money for the ultra-wealthy, moving in the highest social circles in America and internationally, and cultivating relationships with politicians, academics, scientists, and royalty with a systematic intensity that, in retrospect, was clearly deliberate. Epstein maintained a Manhattan townhouse that was reportedly one of the largest private residences in New York City. He had a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Little St. James, which became known to investigators as a location where he brought young women and girls. He had a ranch in New Mexico. He had a Palm Beach estate. He had a private jet, which became known in court proceedings as the Lolita Express, that flew him and his associates to these various properties. In 2005, a Palm Beach detective began investigating Epstein after a parent complained to police about their underage daughter. The investigation expanded. Dozens of victims were identified. The case was referred to federal prosecutors. And then something happened that would become one of the most controversial prosecutorial decisions in American legal history. Alexander Acosta, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, offered Epstein a plea deal. Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state charges of soliciting prostitution. He registered as a sex offender. He served 13 months in a county jail, during which he was allowed to leave the facility on work release for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. He walked out of that arrangement in 2009 with his wealth largely intact, his social connections largely intact, and his freedom entirely intact. His victims were not told about the plea deal in advance. They had no opportunity to object. The non-prosecution agreement that was part of the deal granted immunity not just to Epstein, but to any potential co-conspirators. That clause would become enormously significant later. Epstein resumed his life. The parties continued. The private jet continued to fly. The island continued to host guests, and Prince Andrew's association with him continued. The association Andrew and Epstein were introduced in the early 1990s, reportedly through Ghislaine Maxwell, the British socialite and daughter of the disgraced media magnate Robert Maxwell. Maxwell and Andrew had been friends for years. She was part of his social circle long before Epstein entered the picture. Through Maxwell, Andrew and Epstein became, by all accounts, genuine friends. Not casual acquaintances, not business contacts. Friends. People who spent time together, who visited each other's homes, who appeared in photographs together, who were seen at each other's social events across more than a decade. After Epstein's 2008 conviction and release, most people in his social circle created distance. Politicians who had attended his dinner parties stopped returning calls. Academics who had sat at his table stopped mentioning his name. The careful social architecture of the Epstein network began, quietly and quickly, to dissolve. Andrew did not dissolve with it. In 2010, he visited Epstein in New York. He stayed at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse for several days. He was photographed walking in Central Park with Epstein. Those photographs, published by the Daily Mail, showed Andrew in relaxed conversation with a man who had just finished serving time as a convicted sex offender. The palace offered an explanation at the time. Andrew had visited to end the friendship in person. It was a farewell meeting. He had gone to New York specifically to tell Epstein face to face that the relationship was over. Many people found this explanation difficult to believe. A 4-day stay at a convicted sex offender's home to deliver a goodbye message stretches credibility in ways that are hard to ignore. The association continued to generate questions. And those questions continued to attach themselves to Andrew's name with increasing force as the years passed. Virginia Giuffre Virginia Roberts was 17 years old when she was recruited into Jeffrey Epstein's network in 2000. She has described being recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, where Virginia was working as a changing room attendant. Maxwell allegedly told her she could earn money as a masseuse for wealthy clients. What followed, according to Virginia's testimony and subsequent legal proceedings, was years of sexual abuse at Epstein's properties, loaned out to Epstein's associates, trafficked across international borders. Virginia, who later took the surname Giuffre, has stated under oath that she was directed by Epstein and Maxwell to have sexual contact with Prince Andrew on 3 separate occasions. She has described specific locations and specific details. She has described a photograph taken at Ghislaine Maxwell's London home in which she, Andrew, and Maxwell appear together, Virginia appearing to be around 17 years old. Andrew has categorically denied ever meeting Virginia Giuffre. He has denied any sexual contact. He has said he has no recollection of ever meeting her despite the existence of a photograph in which they appear together, his arm around her waist. His explanation for the photograph has been widely discussed and widely mocked. He suggested the photograph may have been manipulated. He suggested that the hand in the photograph might not be his hand. He suggested various alternative explanations for an image that appeared, to most observers, fairly straightforwardly to show him with his arm around a teenage girl at Ghislaine Maxwell's home. The photograph became one of the central pieces of evidence in public discussions of Andrew's conduct. The palace never produced a convincing explanation for it. The Newsnight interview on November 16, 2019, Prince Andrew sat down with BBC journalist Emily Maitlis for an interview broadcast on Newsnight. The interview had been arranged, reportedly, as an opportunity for Andrew to address the questions surrounding his relationship with Epstein directly, to put the matter to rest, to demonstrate transparency. It became one of the most catastrophic television interviews in British broadcasting history. Andrew's explanations were extraordinary in their implausibility. He acknowledged the photograph with Virginia Giuffre but denied any memory of meeting her. He said he had a medical condition at the time that prevented him from sweating, making Virginia's account of him sweating at a nightclub impossible. He said he had a cast-iron alibi for the night Virginia described being with him in London. He had been at a Pizza Express in Woking for a birthday party. He described his continued association with Epstein after the 2008 conviction as a mistaken judgment, but showed no visible remorse. He did not express sympathy for Epstein's victims. He did not describe their suffering as something that affected him. He appeared, to millions of viewers around the world, to be primarily concerned with his own reputation rather than with the experiences of the people Epstein had abused. The public reaction was immediate and devastating. Within 48 hours of the broadcast, Andrew had lost his role as patron of dozens of charities. Companies that had associated with him began severing ties. His relationship with the University of Huddersfield, where he had been chancellor, was terminated. Sponsors withdrew. Institutions distanced themselves. Within 3 days, Buckingham Palace announced that Andrew would be stepping back from public duties for the foreseeable future. His military titles were removed. His royal patronages were removed. The public-facing infrastructure of his royal life was dismantled with remarkable speed. Emily Maitlis had asked him a question. He had answered it. And in answering it, he had destroyed himself more comprehensively than any critic could have done. The legal proceedings in July 2019, before the Newsnight interview, Jeffrey Epstein had been arrested again. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York filed charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy. The case was led by prosecutors who had not been bound by the 2008 plea deal. On August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. The official cause of death was ruled suicide by hanging. His death did not end the legal proceedings against those around him. Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in July 2020. She was tried in federal court in late 2021 on charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy. She was convicted on 5 of 6 counts in December 2021. She was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison in June 2022. In August 2021, Virginia Giuffre filed a civil lawsuit against Prince Andrew in a New York federal court, alleging that he had sexually abused her when she was 17 years old. Andrew's legal team argued that the lawsuit should be dismissed based on a settlement agreement Virginia had reached with Epstein in 2009. That settlement had included a release of claims against other potential defendants. Andrew's lawyers argued that this release covered him. The judge disagreed. In January 2022, Judge Lewis Kaplan ruled that the case could proceed to trial. The prospect of Prince Andrew, son of the Queen of England, appearing in a New York courtroom to answer questions about sexual abuse under oath was one the palace found untenable. In February 2022, a settlement was reached. The financial terms were not publicly disclosed, though reports suggested a figure in the range of £12 million. As part of the settlement, Virginia agreed not to pursue the case further. Andrew made a statement expressing regret for his association with Epstein and his sympathy for the victims of trafficking, but did not admit liability. The settlement ended the civil case. It did not end the questions. It did not restore Andrew's reputation, and it did not restore his royal position. The institutional response in January 2022, just before the settlement was announced, Buckingham Palace confirmed that Andrew's military affiliations and royal patronages were being returned to the Queen and would be redistributed among other working members of the royal family. The statement was carefully worded. It noted that the Duke of York would continue not to undertake public duties and that he was defending the case as a private individual. The phrase private individual was significant. A prince of the United Kingdom, a son of the monarch, was being formally described as a private individual. The institution was making its position clear. Andrew was no longer under its umbrella. He was on his own. His HRH styling was suspended in official contexts. His name disappeared from the palace website's list of working royals. The machinery of royal life, the engagements and the patronages and the official roles and the institutional support, all of it was removed. Queen Elizabeth, his mother, maintained a personal relationship with him. She was seen with him at several private family occasions during the final years of her reign. She died in September 2022. With her death, Andrew lost the one person inside the institution who had consistently protected him. Charles had no such protective instinct. William had no such protective instinct. The family that remained was not inclined toward patience with the brother and uncle who had brought what many inside the palace described as the most damaging scandal of the modern era. Where it stands, Andrew currently lives at Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park, a property he has occupied since 2003. There have been reported disputes with William, who as heir controls the Crown Estate properties, about whether Andrew should continue to occupy Royal Lodge or be moved to a smaller property, Frogmore Cottage, which Harry and Meghan had previously occupied. Andrew has reportedly refused to move. William has reportedly made clear he expects Andrew to vacate. The dispute has not been publicly resolved. Andrew has no official royal role. He attends no public engagements in an official capacity. He receives no public funding for his duties because he has no duties. He has, on occasion, attended private family events. He attended the Trooping the Color in June 2023 as a private individual, not on the balcony among working royals, but watching from a window inside the palace. The balcony, the most recognizable symbol of royal belonging in the world. The place where the family presents itself to the public as unified and whole. Andrew was not on it. The Epstein files, documents from various U.S. court proceedings, have been released in stages since 2024. Andrew's name appears in them. The documents contain references to him in the context of Epstein's activities. Each release generates new media coverage. Each release reattaches his name to a story that the palace had hoped might eventually fade. It has not faded. What this story means: the Andrew scandal is not simply a story about one man's catastrophic judgment. It is a story about institutional failure on multiple levels. It is a story about what happens when proximity to power becomes a form of protection. Epstein cultivated relationships with the powerful specifically because those relationships made him harder to hold accountable. His network was not incidental to his crimes. It was structural to them. The powerful people around him, including Andrew, provided legitimacy and cover whether they understood that or not. It is a story about what happens when an institution prioritizes its own comfort over transparency. The palace's handling of Andrew's situation for years before the Newsnight interview was defined by management and containment rather than honest accounting. The result was an interview so catastrophically misjudged that it caused more damage in 45 minutes than years of careful management had prevented. And it is a story about the limits of royal protection. Andrew had spent his entire life inside an institution that provided extraordinary insulation from the ordinary consequences of ordinary life. He had never, in 60 years, faced genuine external accountability. When it finally arrived, in the form of a federal civil lawsuit in a New York court, the institution discovered that its ability to protect him was not unlimited. That American federal law did not recognize royal privilege. That a judge in Manhattan did not defer to palace communication strategies. The settlement paid the bill. It did not pay the reputational cost. Andrew was his mother's favorite son. He flew helicopters in a war. He came home a hero. He had 30 years of official royal life, patronages, and trade missions, and ceremonial roles. All of it is gone, not stripped in one dramatic moment. Dismantled piece by piece over years. Patronages lost. Military titles removed. Official duties ended. Name removed from the palace website. Removed from the balcony. Described as a private individual. The institution he was born into, that he served for decades, that his mother led for 70 years, has moved on without him. His brother is king. His nephew will be king. The line of succession, the ceremonial occasions, the public face of the monarchy, none of it includes Andrew anymore. He lives in a large house in Windsor. He attends no official events. His name appears in court documents connected to a dead sex trafficker. His most memorable public moment in the past decade is an interview so disastrous it became a case study in how not to manage a crisis. The soldier prince, the war hero, the favorite son, simply gone. That is all for today here at Royal Report Daily. If you want to stay ahead of every development in the royal world as it continues to unfold, subscribe to the channel right now and turn on your notifications. We cover the real stories, the documented ones, the ones that actually happened. The royal world never stops moving, and we will be here every single time it does.